Hi everyone. Today we're going to make a game that looks kind of like the T-Rex game that you see sometimes when if you use the Chrome browser and your internet is out, this game pops up. So we're going to make a game that looks kind of similar to this in Scratch, using a character that looks like it's running and can jump over obstacles that approach it, and that keeps score as you successfully jump over the obstacles. So let's get started. So the first thing you'll need is a character. I'm going to choose the dog sprite because the dog has some different pictures for its legs and it looks like it's running if you switch between the costumes. One thing I'm going to have to do, you'll have to do the same thing even if you choose a different character, just make sure you have costumes that look like the legs are switching. You don't have to use the dog, but if you pick a different one, make sure you have something like this where it's sort of right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. I have this one where the dog's kind of like thinking. I'm going to delete it because I don't want that. I just want it to walk. So I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit. It seems like it's kind of a little too big. And I'm going to give it a background. I'll put this dog on the beach. Alright, so I think the first thing I want to make it do is make the dog look like it's running. That'll be pretty straightforward. As soon as the game starts, I'm just going to have a forever loop. And while this loop is running, the dog's just going to switch costumes. It'll just go to the next costume. There's only two. So it'll just go to the next costume and then wait a little bit, because if it just switches costume, it'll do it so fast you won't even be able to see the costume switches. So I want it to wait. Just like 0.2 seconds is probably enough. If I run it, it just looks like the dog's running in place. And so the key to making it look like it's not running in place and actually looking like it's running in some sort of environment and actually moving is going to be to actually have the environment move. So it's going to kind of be, if you've ever been sitting on a train or in a car and you've been sitting still and you see like a car next to you start moving and you think you're moving, it's kind of an effect similar to that, where it's just relative motion. Something else moving can give the impression that the thing next to it's moving. And so what we'll do with that is just have some object in the background that kind of moves by. It's not even really part of the game. It's just sort of there, and it's going to make it look like the dog's running through the level. So I'm going to add another sprite that's just going to be there for background. I'm going to use a cloud. Just put the cloud up in the sky. And what I'm going to have the cloud do is also in a forever loop. I'm going to have the cloud just move along the x-axis. So I'm going to change x by -10 is probably fine, because moving to the left, so it'll be a negative number. And you'll notice that's kind of fast. The cloud seems like it's in a hurry. I'm going to do -5 and see if that's better. Well, you'll notice that the cloud gets stuck on the left side. So let me just drag it back now for this. Yeah, I think that's better. But anyway, so I think I'll leave that at -5, but I still need to make the cloud go back to the right side when it reaches the end. So what I'll do is get an if block, and if the cloud's x position, and from operators I'll get a less than. So if the x position is less than, what's current x? I'm going to look down here. The current x is -291. So if it's less than -290, that should be enough for it to have to go back to the right side. So I'll get a set x2, not a change this time. This is set. We're just going to send it directly to a certain point, and I'll send it directly to like 300. So when it reaches the end, it just goes back, and it just is in a constant loop. And you could just leave it like that. I think I kind of want, I don't want there to always be a cloud. I want to like there be a brief pause in between. So I'll just have it wait. I'll get a wait block. I'll have it wait just like 1 second before it resets. And also, because I think it'll get stuck. Yeah, it just kind of gets stuck when it waits. I think what I'll do is I'll have it hide. So as soon as it gets to the end, it hides. And then after it moves and waits, then it shows again. So it'll kind of disappear, because that's when it hides. And then it'll show up right before it starts moving again. So that hide and show makes it kind of look like it disappeared to the left and reappears on the right. You can make this longer or shorter or not have it at all, but I think it looks a little bit better that way. So, alright, it kind of looks like the dog's moving now. Because it looks like there's something in the background that's moving. And also, we need to have some kind of obstacle. So I'll choose new sprite, and it could be anything, but I'm going to have it be rocks. I don't know. Rocks seem like a good obstacle, something you don't want to run into. I'm going to resize that, they're a little big. And so just like the cloud, I can actually copy a lot of the code over, because a lot of it can be really similar. Let me just copy this over. I'm going to drag it over to the rock and drop it. And for the most part, it kind of works, I think. Almost. It almost works. One problem is that the size of the sprite is different. So the rock never actually gets because it's, I don't know, I think it's based on, it might be based on the, I don't remember if it's the midpoint is the X value of the sprite, or if it's like the left edge. But for whatever reason, you'll notice this is not negative 291, this is negative 257, because it's a different sized sprite. So it hits the edge at negative 257, not negative 291, so we have to change this number. So negative 290, negative 256. And now it should go back. And so far it's kind of doing what it's supposed to do. Looks like the dog's running through this space. It's kind of predictable. It's just every 1 second the thing goes by. Like one thing you could do is just add a little bit of randomness. So pick a random number. Well, I don't know if it lets you. I don't think it's gonna pick a random decimal. I think it only lets you pick random, like random integers. So let's see. One thing I could do to fix that, because what I want to do is make it like kind of a range of fractions of seconds, because it should be, I think I want it to be about 1 second, so maybe I could do like 5 to 15, but then divide it by 10, so it's actually 0.5 to 1.5, right? Because like if I pick a random number between 5 and 15, I don't actually want it to be 5 seconds or 15 seconds. I want it to be 0.5 or 1.5, or if it picks a 7, I don't want it to be 7 seconds. I want it to be 0.7. So that would be, whatever that number is, it would just be divided by 10. So if it picks, if it randomly picks 7, it's actually going to be 0.7. If it randomly picks 8, it'll be 0.8, because I'm dividing the number by 10 every time. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just duplicate this and put that with the cloud. So I did not mean to do that. Drag and drop to the cloud. I just got rid of the other one. And this one is for the wait. Alright, so now the timing should be a little bit less predictable. Sometimes it'll show up more quickly, sometimes it'll take longer. And for both the cloud and the rock, so that there's a little bit more variation. And it's not exactly the same every time. Right? So the spacing will be a little bit different. Alright, so everything's moving the way it should move so far. However, the dog still needs to be able to jump over the rock. Just like in the dinosaur game, the dinosaur could jump over like the plants and things that were in its way. I need the dinosaur to be able to, or I need the dog to be able to jump. So I'm going to have a separate script for this because the costume switching is just going to have to happen on its own. This is something that should be able to happen independently. And this will also happen all the time. It just needs to be able to, you can just kind of jump whenever. For now, let's just do a simple jump with if space key is pressed. Change y by, let's try 100. Just see what that does. So rock approaches, dog jumps, and it just flies up to the top of the screen. So there's a couple of problems. One is when the space key is pressed, it changes y by 100, and then as long as that space key is pressed, it just keeps changing y by 100. It's just happening. It might happen more than once if you just like hold the space key a little bit too long. Another thing is the dog doesn't come back down, so that's a problem too. So let's add some gravity so that the dog comes down. The way I'll do that, another if the y value of the dog is in the air, right? If the dog's in the air, gravity should have effect. So if y value, the y position is greater than some number, what's that number going to be? Whatever the floor is. So what's the sort of point that I'm going to consider the floor? Let's go with, I think this is a good spot, y equals negative 111. So I'm going to say if y is greater than negative 112, right? Negative 111 is greater than negative 112. Then the dog should fall. So what will I do about that? Well, let's just see what happens if I say change y in the opposite direction. So change y by negative 100. What you end up with is nothing's really happening. I'm hitting space and nothing's happening. That's, even though this seems like it should work, unfortunately, they're both happening kind of at the same time. So like you hit the space key, it goes up briefly, and then within the same forever loop, it immediately snaps back down. So that's not quite going to work either, but we're getting closer. So I think what we should do is instead of having this happen all at once and this happen all at once, it should happen gradually. That way it'll kind of glide up and glide back down. We're not actually going to use glide. And instead, I mean, I suppose you could use glide. There's nothing actually wrong with that, but I kind of think you have a little bit more control if you use a repeat, and you repeat smaller steps. So let's try like change y by 10 times, and then change y by negative 10 times. Let's see how that works. And now it looks like I've got a jumping dog. Now the jump isn't great. It's not really enough to get over the rock, for example. But it's a lot closer. So I think what I'll maybe do is just add a few more repeats. I'll say repeat 15. We'll see how that works. The dog just jumps a little higher. And if I have the dog start up higher, because it's kind of too low, right? It's kind of too low right now. So I think if I just make sure that the dog see, where do I really want it? I want it here. Hopefully it'll stay there. So I want it to go to negative 167, negative 110 at the beginning of the program. And then hopefully it just stays. And it looks like, what did I do? That was all right. So that it looks like that was a mistake to have a repeat 15 because it forced the dog to fall through 15 repeats of this, even though it wasn't necessary. Because remember, this whole thing is in a loop. So I need this, when space key pressed, I need it to repeat 15 times so that it gradually goes up 15 steps of 10 to complete the jump. But falling will just happen. Falling will just happen gradually, like just because it's in a loop. Now here's another problem. If I hold the space key, the dog just flies. And that's because it says if space key pressed, keep repeating that change y by. That's not really what I want it to be able to do. I kind of just want it to jump and then fall back down. So I think I need to add an extra condition to this if space key is pressed and the dog is on the ground. Right? Because if the dog's not on the ground, it shouldn't be able to jump. What would it be jumping off of? So I need to add an extra condition here. So in operators, I'm going to get this new block that you might not have seen yet. An AND block. And the way this works is if you have an AND block, two conditions have to be true. So for the whole thing to be true. So in this case, I want if space is pressed and the dog is actually standing on the ground. When's the dog standing on the ground? When his Y position is less than a certain number. I'm going to say, let's see, where is he right now? I kind of chose my floor for gravity switching on right here. I kind of chose my floor as negative 112. So if the dog is greater than negative 112, gravity pulls down. So I'm going to say if Y position is less than negative 112, then it's okay, then it can jump. Well, it might get pulled down to exactly 112, so I should say less than negative 113, or negative 111. Right. Yeah, negative 111. That way, if it actually comes down to exactly negative 112 when it gets pulled down, this will still work. I think that should be fine. So now the dog will stop when it reaches its top of its jump, and I'm holding the space key. It just jumps and comes back down. Even if I hold it, it doesn't fly anymore. Alright, so I'm almost there. The game's mostly built. I can just barely jump over that rock. It's actually kind of a hard game. We'll see how this works out. I might need to speed up the rock or something. Or maybe just make the dog jump higher. Do like 18 repeats. The dog just jumps a little bit higher, it'll be a little easier. Alright, so anyway, the game's almost done. Really just need to keep score. So basically, as the rock goes by, if you didn't run into it, you should get a point. So let's go with. So for keeping score, all I really need to do is sense when the rock gets past the dog. We kind of already know when the rock gets past the dog. It's right here in the rock code when the rock hides and goes back to the right side and shows. Well, all of that happens when the rock goes past the dog. So all I really need is a variable for score which I kind of already have set up. Let me just delete that so I can show you the process. You just click make a variable, type in score, and you have a score variable. So what you really need to do is when all this happens, also change score by 1, right? So then it'll change the score, and then the rock will go back to the right side, and it'll start all over again. Another thing I'm going to do while I'm over here setting this stuff up is I'm also going to set the score variable at the beginning. It should be set to 0. When you start, you got to make sure you initialize your variables. That means set them in their at their beginning state. So, initializing the state of your program is important. It's important to choose how you want your program to start. In this case, you want to start the score at 0. So now, if you jump over the rock and the rock goes by, you get a point. So all that's really left is ending the game. So I'll need one more sprite. This time I'm going to hover over the new sprite symbol, not click on it. I'm going to click on paint. I'll click on text, and I'm just going to type game over. So make sure I click on the screen, then click type game over, and just make this a little bigger. And I'm repositioning it on the screen. Just make sure you have to actually click on the actual letter. Like, you can't even click like in between letters. And those I'm clicking right now, nothing's happening. I can't drag it. If I click on the red, like the actual part of the letter, then I can move it. So all I really want this thing to do is to go away at the beginning and then show up at the end. So I'm going to have a when green flag is clicked, hide. And then I need some code for ending the game. And that's the code for ending the game is just going to be to broadcast a game over message, so I might as well just set that up now. When it receives the message game over, it's going to show, and then it's going to end the game. So it'll stop all. Not everything, and then everything will stop. So I just need the code that tells it to do that. I need something to broadcast that message game over. And that, I think, should also be, it could be the dog or the rock, really. Either one. I guess I'll just choose the dog. And because it's just going to sense when they collide. So if, in this case, I selected the dog sprite, so if it's touching the rock sprite, just broadcast the message game over. So now, if I mess up and I hit the rock, it's game over. So now I have a fully functional game. I think, yeah, it actually made it over the rock, just barely. It's kind of a hard game. You have to really time it exactly right. But it keeps score, and if you collide with the obstacle, you lose. So a few things you might need to adjust. I mean, I didn't have to do that just now. It kind of works as it is, but you might have some issues with the positioning of the sprites. A lot of times the solution to that problem is initializing the location of the sprite. Remember that initializing thing that I talked about, just setting up a starting state. How do you want the game to start? Well, I did actually do that for the dog. I told the dog exactly where to go at the beginning. I said go to -167, -110. And a similar thing can happen with the rocks. If you don't say where to go, they can end up in an incorrect location, and that can mess with, they can kind of like mess with all of your code, because if the X position or the Y position isn't what you thought it would be, that can mess things up. So if you're having problems, maybe consider setting up a go-to for your rocks or for your cloud. That might help. But as it is, this is working fine. Another thing that can often trip people up is the exact numbers that you put in these conditions. So like I chose negative 111 here and negative 112 here, those numbers, if you pick different sprites, those numbers might not work for you because of how Scratch sort of identifies the location of a sprite. I think it's based on the center of the sprite, and if you have a bigger sprite, that means the center is going to be like it's going to look like it's in a different place for the same number. You know, if this dog was way bigger, the center of the dog would not be at, what is it right now, negative 167. The center of the dog wouldn't be at negative 167. If it was a bigger dog, it might be, you know, in a different spot entirely. You know, if I double the size of this dog, now the center of, all right, now where's the center? The center of the dog is at negative 104, right? So if you change the size, if you have a sprite that's a different shape or a different size, these numbers might be different, and that'll kind of just be up to you to figure out what the correct numbers are, and you can only really do that by just trial and error. You just have to guess. And like here's an issue. I just noticed I'm clicking the start button and it's stuck on game over. It's because it didn't initialize the rock. So what I'm going to do is to make sure the rock goes to the right side at the beginning of the game. So I think an X of as far to the right as it can go should be good. Let's go with 300, and Y equals negative 128 should be good. But that way, you know, when the game ends, when I start it again, for some reason it kind of hangs up and it makes me click it again. I think maybe because the rock didn't go back at the end of the game, so it starts the game in the wrong spot. It's probably running one script ahead of the other. This is a thing that happens a lot in Scratch. So what's probably happening, like if I click this, it's still stuck on game over. It's probably because at the end of my last game, the rock was still touching the dog. So this code this code triggered the broadcast. There's a number of things I could do to fix that. I can just make the rocks go away once the game ends, and then they won't be there when I restart. That's one possibility. So I think I'll just do that. When the game ends, well, no, maybe I won't. Another solution is don't have the dog control this, have the rocks control it. And I think that should solve the problem, because the rocks will move before it ever has a chance to sense this. So let me send this code over to the rocks and change it from if touching rocks to if touching dog. And now the rock should definitely go to a different spot before it ever checks to see if there's a game over condition. So now, as the game ends, I restart, no problem anymore. Right? So there's little things like that you might overlook. I mean, I didn't even think that would ever be a problem, and then it turned out to be a problem. So there's little things that you might overlook. One of the best solutions is just sort of trial and error. If something doesn't work, try something else and see if you can fix it. Anyway, that should be everything you need to know to make a similar game. So looks like I'm all done here, and good luck.